Hi, it's Senator Malcolm Roberts, and I'm in Brisbane doing the weekly wrap-up. This week, I want to start by acknowledging many thousands of volunteers around this country. Volunteers who are working on issues opposing the government. I'm not talking about the Labor government. I'm talking about governance in this country. I opposed the Liberal Nationals for many years as a volunteer, for 8 years in fact, on pursuing the climate fraud that was being perpetrated by the LNP and by the Labor Party and the Greens. And I have met recently in travelling around Queensland and in North Queensland just in the last few weeks, thousands of people who are working very hard for no money, entirely voluntarily, and they're fighting the government to bring back sanity in this country. A huge variety of issues. What's even worse, because I remember thinking about this myself many times, here am I paying taxes to fund the government to fight, to propagate these issues, and I don't get any money for doing it. That's what volunteers are looking at. They're paying taxes to the government. The government uses that tax money to perpetrate the fraud and the problems, and the volunteers are actually then getting no money at all for opposing these things. And I mean some insidious things. It's right around the country, whether it be Veterans Affairs, whether it be climate, whether it be COVID. There are so many people volunteering. Matt Walker this week crossed in. It'd be in Toowoomba or heading for Brisbane today, 5 o'clock. I think he'll be arriving. He's just walked up from Melbourne to Brisbane to champion the cause of the many thousands of people who have been killed or seriously injured, maimed for life due to the COVID injections. And he's given some heartwarming stories and encouraging stories to me the other day, because he's saying at every town he drops into, he's come up the inland route, every town he drops into, people know what's going on. But it's just difficult to get it out into the main mouthpiece media and to get it in front of politicians. So we will continue to help Matt. But he's just one example. People all over Queensland, all over Australia, volunteers doing amazing work. And as I keep saying, every major problem in this country has come out of Parliament House in Canberra. They're environmental issues, they're human issues, human environment, not just the natural environment, economic issues. Some of these things that the government is perpetrating, Liberal National Party under Morrison before, under Turnbull before, and Labor Party now, they're inhuman. There's no justification whatsoever in the way of data. The data actually contradicts what the governments are doing. And I made some notes here, but lying governments are destroying our natural environment. Lying governments are destroying our natural environment, destroying our human environment, and creating intergenerational debt. And I don't just mean economic debt, I mean environmental debt and lifestyle debt. The policies are fundamentally anti-human. And that's why so many people are up and busy volunteering. Stay strong, because there are many of these issues now starting to bear fruit, because the data is revealing these issues are coming towards us. So stay strong. We've been working on this particular issue that I'm going to talk about today since 2007. Being in Canberra, I tell people, it's like walking through treacle, up to your waist in treacle, or it's like swimming through treacle or molasses. It's just so damn slow, because, in the private sector where I'm used to being, if you make a mistake, you either get found out because the marketplace will find you out, or you tell the truth. Either way, the mistake gets clarified, or your company goes broke. But in Parliament, the politicians, the bureaucrats are busy covering up their mistakes and covering up the other party's mistakes as well, because they all work together in a nice little club. Now, today I want to talk about something that I promised to talk about a few weeks ago when I just got back from North Queensland. I made some notes on a plane flying back from Cairns to Rocky, and we were going to do the live stream, but it turned out we only had a little bit of time in Rocky to do the live stream. We did it at the airport. Wasn't very effective, but anyway, we did it. But I didn't cover that issue then, even though I made the notes a few weeks ago. But I want to go right through it today. Before doing so, I want to thank my staff team. who organised the trip up, and one staff member in particular, Richard, who accompanied me into North Queensland. We went to Cairns, flew to Cairns, drove to Atherton, then drove to Ravenshoe, and I'll tell you what we did along the way. But I want to thank the many fine Queenslanders who made me feel very, very welcome and just freely gave their time and their energy and their information. I met so many people and listened to so many. I can think of Sharon, Joe at Atherton, Sharon, Laurie, Peter, Rob, Tom, and others at Ravenshoe. I want to thank the Ravenshoe pub for their hospitality too. We had a fabulous forum there, and talking mainly about the wind turbines that are destroying that area, as well as other issues that are to do with the governance of this country. So my first port of call was after we landed, went downtown to talk with Gina, and then we went to the forum in Cairns. I've forgotten the name of the pub, the bar. It was Rum and... Anyway, thank you. I apologise for forgetting your name. But thank you so much for organising it. A lively forum, very lively. I can remember a few people who spoke out. Rick in particular spoke really well about the problems with councils these days. Councils are another form of governance, and they're not being held accountable. Then that next day we went to Atherton, where we met Joe and his wife, Bronwyn, at a hemp farm. Now, hemp is the industrial use of the cannabis variety of plant, but it has got very, very low or no THC, the psychotropic element. Did I get that word right? Psychotropic? Anyway, they're now doing this on a trial basis because Joe has a license for growing and researching into hemp. It's a marvelous crop. It really is. But you know, the billionaires killed hemp in the 30s. Hemp was being developed to be an alternative for timber as a source of paper. Hemp was going to be a source of paper, wonderful paper. It's a very, very wonderful, well, it's not fabric is the word, but, well, it's paper. But William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper baron in the United States, Hearst Newspapers, he went around before that and he bought so many pine forests to provide the timber for the paper for newsprint. And then he didn't like hemp, of course, because it challenged his monopoly, his very strong control of the market. And so he fought against hemp and squashed it. We also had hemp coming out and making textiles, clothes, and at the same time, major corporations in America coming up with synthetic fabrics, which have had their day, but and they're now falling by the wayside because of cotton and wool superior natural properties. But anyway, the synthetic textiles, they jumped all over hemp and squashed hemp and subdued it for many decades. It's just starting to come back now. And then, of course, we had the petroleum-based drugs from the Rockefellers and Big Pharma. Petroleum-based drugs, which have got hideous side effects quite often, hideous side effects. I'm thinking of the opiates, etc. Medical cannabis in the 1930s, I think this is correct, the timing, 1930s, maybe 1920s, was the number one prescribed medication in North America. It was number one in the doctor's almanac. It was wonderful. And it is wonderful, medicinal cannabis. But it was squashed to make way for petroleum-based drugs that Big Pharma now kills people with and hurts people with. And of course, some of the drugs are useful, but Big Pharma killed medicinal cannabis, gave it such a bad name so that they could have the market to themselves. And you can't patent medicinal cannabis, so there's not as much money for Big Pharma, but there's plenty of health benefits. Textiles, paper, medicinal cannabis, and now also we're seeing research in this country, in our country, Australia, into growing, using cannabis for food production, hemp for food production. And it's a wonderful food as well. Pauline and I have long supported medicinal cannabis and hemp. The TGA has been squashing medicinal cannabis. I won't go into the details, but we know that that's the case because the TGA is saddled up to Big Pharma. Big Pharma controls the reins on TGA. And it is quite clear that the Minister for Health can make a single change, a simple single change on regulations. No legislation needed, and make medicinal cannabis much more widely available, much cheaper rather. So the government is working for corporations. And it's not just this government. We approached Minister Greg Hunt when he was health minister previously about medicinal cannabis. Not interested. Not interested. I took a person along who had many decades researching and actively promoting medicinal cannabis. Wonderful man, very good researcher. I know him personally, very, very competent. And Minister Hunt, at the end of the presentation, said that's the best presentation he's seen on medicinal cannabis. So the government still squashed it. It's insane. It's deceitful. So then we went from Atherton, a cane farm just near Atherton, really nice farm, by the way, where they were growing hemp on a trial basis. And we went to Ravenshoe and to the Chilumban wind farm area, and after calling in at the Caban wind turbine area. They're not farms. They're not pretty. They're not useful. They're not lovely things like farms are. They're hideous misinvestments, parasitic misinvestments. And Chilumban and Caban and the ones in North Queensland, further North Queensland, up around around Richmond, Hewenden area, and further west. The ones in Wide Bay, the ones in Western Victoria, the ones in New South Wales. People are now starting to really rise up and speak out about these things. Well, we'll get into them in detail, but Wide Bay, some of these wind turbine complexes, these industrial complexes, parasitic misinvestments, some of the solar panel complexes, stretching for thousands and thousands of square meters. They're not even connected to the grid. We're paying for them. We're paying for them as if they were producing, literally as if they were producing. The investors are reaping the benefits, but we're not getting power out of them because they haven't been connected to the grid. And now we're seeing a flurry of power lines racing across the countryside, not worrying about farmers, not worrying about rural communities, not worrying about people in general, not worrying about the natural environment, not worrying about the rainforest, not worrying about the pristine creeks, the pristine rivers, the trees, the wildlife corridors, just bulldozing their way through. And no regard for the human environment, no regard for the natural environment. And we're seeing now people getting very, very upset about this. The loss of their land, the loss of productive capacity. Opposition is growing. And I want people to remember this name, Katie McCallum. Katie is a former policeman, and she knows her stuff. And she's wonderfully connected within the Wide Bay area. She's the shopkeeper at the general store in Kilkeevan. A lovely, lovely woman. Married, kids, running the general store at Kilkeevan, left the police force, and she is armed with the law, and she knows what she's doing. And a lot of people are coming to her. Also, Catherine Myers in Victoria, we've met at Gympie. These people are really fired up. So I wanted to come now to Chilumban, and I'm going to talk about the wind turbine complexes and the damage they're doing. It's going to take a while, but I try to limit my comments to 20 to 30 minutes. Sometimes it's difficult because of the topics we pick, and then have 30 minutes for questioning. But today I am going to do this issue because people have asked me for it, and I promised you that I would do it. So first of all, at Chilumban, at Ravenshoe, lovely town, by the way, we met a group of volunteers, a great group of volunteers, friends of Chilumban, very energetic. I won't remember all their names, but Peter, Tom, Laurie, Penny, Sharon, and several others. Laurie is like the hub of this group. She's the hub, and the spokes come out from it, and she connects people. We even had a cup of coffee down at her Cheeky, I think it's called the Cheeky Possum Cafe next day. She's a lovely lady, and we met someone from Cairns who came up just to talk with Laurie. So Cairns is a couple of hours away, so they came up from Cairns to talk to Laurie. She's a real hub. And then Sharon Trezise drove us around, my advisor and I, around the wind turbine sites, and we covered some territory, saw wonderful things which I'll share with you. We went to a turbine, then the next day we went to a wind turbine blade graveyard. These bloody things were installed in 2002. They're only 20 meters long, the wind turbine blades now. And they were made of aluminium, the original ones. They cracked, so they had to replace them, and then they scrapped them after 3 years. They just scrapped it after 3 years. So all that investment for just 3 years worth of very irregular, low density power. What did they do with the wind turbine blades? They dumped them in the bush. Just dumped them. Bulldozed trees for it and just left them there. They're right beside a public road. You can see them. It's a track, admittedly, but it is a public road. It's a gazetted public road. You can see them. And they're just left in the bush. No recycling. And that's with aluminium. That's actually easy to recycle. So there's no responsibility. They're just dumped in the bush. So much for the environmentalists, eh? The modern ones, I think they're made of fiberglass and other, compounds. They're not possible to recycle because they're so costly to recycle. So all these things that are going up, destroying the aesthetics, well, we'll cover that later, they're not recyclable, and they're not being recycled. It's too expensive. So listen to some of the key issues. What they're doing with the wind turbines is anti-environment, both the construction and the operation. The construction is leveling the whole ridgeline with a 70-meter wide haul road along the top of a mountain range in North Queensland, and in Livingston Shire, and in the back of Townsville, and in the back of Innisfail and Ingham. These things are just leveling the whole of the top of a mountain range. So this will never be reclaimed, unlike a coal mine, which when it's finished is reclaimed to a better condition than it was beforehand. And the coal miners have to pay a bond. For every acre they disturb, they have to pay a lot of money into the state government, and they don't get that money back till it's reclaimed back to quality that it was either identical to before they mined, or better than when they started mining. So these things you never reclaim a mountaintop once it's been chopped off and flattened. You'll never reclaim that. You'll never reclaim the tropical rainforests, the corridors, wildlife corridors next to the tropical rainforests. And this goes from, they're running along the edge of a wildlife. I think it's actually a rainforest heritage, rainforest heritage area. I don't know if it's World Heritage Area, but it's highly valued for its environmental values. So in the construction, they're destroying it. They're putting potentially arsenic, toxic arsenic, from which is natural up there under the ground, and that goes into the environment. They're destroying trees, destroying wildlife corridors, as I mentioned. They will destroy pristine rivers that flow into the Great Barrier Reef area, and huge transmission lines. You see, with a coal-fired power station or a nuclear power station or a hydro plant, you've got a concentrated source of high density energy. And so you need just one or two lines coming out, or half a dozen lines coming out, but they're all together. That's it. And when the current coal-fired power stations expire or exhaust themselves, all you have to do is build a replacement right there. You don't need to replace the transmission lines. But with wind turbines, they're scattered across hundreds of kilometres. With solar panels, they're scattered across tens of kilometres and huge arrays. And so you have very low energy density, very low density. So you need lots and lots of area disturbed, soils disturbed, pristine farmland disturbed, pristine rainforest disturbed, and you have massive area disturbed by transmission lines that people are now starting to oppose. So we went to a wetland there. It was called Woodley Swamp near Ravenshoe, and I just took a quick footage. We met a wildlife guide. He does bird tours. He does significant tours of the wildlife up in Cape York. He's a bloody pommy, but he's a nice bloke. Anyway, he was telling us that the bird life is much, much lower now than in the past. But I've just called him to verify things, and I've got to be truthful. We've got to debate this properly. He said that the birds could be missing because of a food problem, maybe a change of local crops. It could be because of the weather is not it varies every year. So the weather has not been kind to them this year. For example, he said this year we had he was still seeing floods up in the wet, not floods, but water in creeks in the dry season up in Cape York, which was very, very rare. Not unusual, entirely natural. But anyway, he was saying, so we don't know the reason why the birds weren't at the wetlands, but the locals think it's because the Caban wind turbines are killing the birds, and their vibration frequency is upsetting the birds and sending them away. So we'll know after the bird count, which happens in 6th and 7th of this month, in just a few days' time. Then we have fires from the wind turbines, and fires in a remote location. You can't get up and fight the fires, and they destroy the bush when they've collapsed and set the bush on fire. So that's anti-environment. Construction and operation is a huge negative aspect of the wind turbines and solar panels. The wind turbines, of course, are known in some areas of the world as bird choppers, not wind turbines, bird choppers. Then the second aspect is anti-human. Infrasound is the frequency of sound that's made by these wind turbines. There's a vroom, 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 and it's perpetual while ever the wind's blowing, which is a problem because quite often the wind turbines, of course, don't have the wind. But while ever the wind is blowing, this is disturbing families. It is known to cause severe health disorders. And I'm not just talking about mental health disorders or stress. I'm talking about emotional stress. I'm talking about physical disorders, hearing, all bodily organs, serious issues. Infrasound is the problem. And what will happen is the whole of Ravenshoe will be surrounded by a ring of steel with many, many wind turbines. In Brisbane, we had Brisbane's water supply comes from near a creek, flows into Brisbane's water supply in Wivenhoe Dam. We had, Pauline and I were called by a few farmers a few years ago up at Kilcoy, very concerned about installing acres and acres of solar panels and carcinogens flowing into the creek, flowing into the Brisbane's water supply, which feeds water to Brisbane, Gold Coast, Toowoomba, potentially they're connected, Ipswich, Boona, Beaudesert, Logan, so many communities in the southeast. So you've probably got about 2.5-3 million people dependent on this water, which is going to be fed by carcinogens. And then hailstorms smashing these panels. And they're building these, they were proposing to build these things. We got involved and created such a fuss. They haven't announced the go-ahead date yet. But anyway, it's a known area for hailstones. And so when they smash the panels, you get an accelerated release of the carcinogens into the Brisbane's water supply. You can't fight fires around a high voltage line, and so with these wind turbines and solar complexes scattered, you'll have such an area covered in transmission lines that there'll be no firefighting. And then it's hideous. You can't put up with the waking up in the morning and looking out at what used to be beautiful North Queensland and the bush, and you see these bloody things, these wind turbines, or they're dumped in the bush. The Aboriginal community has been split in Ravenshoe, so we're told, and I think they're having a lend of the Aboriginals in many, many ways up there. So, anti-environment, anti-human. Third aspect, they're economically disastrous. They're parasitic. You know what parasites do? They kill their host. And that's what these things are doing. They're killing their host, which is you and me, the people who use electricity. This is a parasitic misinvestment. That's what I'm calling them. And thank Alan Moran and I came up with that. Parasitic misinvestment. Every country in the world with significant proportions, high proportions of solar and wind, have increasing electricity prices. It stands to reason. It's obvious, because solar and wind are not feasible without subsidies. And who pays for the subsidies? The electricity users. Raises the price of electricity. And then you factor in all the inefficiencies in solar and wind, and you see a double impact. That's why you're paying high electricity prices now. Australia, when we relied upon coal-fired power stations and a little bit of snowy hydro, we had the cheapest electricity in the world. Now we've got amongst the highest in the world. We've also got the highest per capita subsidies in the world for solar and wind. And so the other thing is that with highly variable weather, we have a big risk for the people who install wind turbines. So what that means is very, very generous subsidies to make them attractive. The contracts are very, very generous, and it is costing and will cost even more in the future. So we've got high variability in production, and therefore very high capital risk. So that means high subsidies. We subsidize not only the construction, we subsidize the operation. We subsidize the construction. And the Chinese are making out like bandits, except that they're doing that. What they're doing is entirely within the law, entirely ethical. They're building these solar panels and wind turbines and shipping them out here. There's very low employment with solar panels and wind turbines. They're very, very low electricity. For each so-called green job, a bullshit job, with each so-called green job, you lose 2.3 real jobs. They're unarguable figures. They're fact from Spain and studies overseas. In 2019, Alan Moran, the acclaimed economist, Dr. Alan Moran, recognized that in 2019 it was costing us $19 billion across the economy for wind and solar. $19 billion in excess costs. Every household, on average, paid $1,300 per year additional cost on electricity. That's above their electricity bill, paid an additional $1,300. When you've got a median income of around $51,000, that's after tax, say, roughly $46,000. How can someone on $46,000, already paying for electricity, already paying for cost of living, then be expected to pay an extra $1,300 on top just for solar and wind additional costs? The governments have been telling us that it was under $100 for solar and wind. The real figures, according to Alan, are almost $600. That was in 2019. It's now far, far higher. Then, as I've said a few times, the energy density from wind and solar is extremely low. The laws of physics show that it cannot be anything else. It'll never be high energy density. And so you've got very, very low energy density, which means very high cost per unit of electricity. Then the capacity factor. There's a very low capacity factor. Sometimes in peak hours, it averages 10% of the capacity. 10% of a turbine capacity is in use. 10% of the solar panels capacity is in use. They have a nameplate capacity. They never achieve that. You've got to have 3 or 4 times as much as the nameplate capacity just to make sure you get the power out of them. Very inefficient, very expensive. They destroy productive farmland and force farmers off the land, raising food prices. I mean, the Greens, inner city Greens, are sitting here telling Palaszczuk and Albanese, we need more solar and wind panels. And Palaszczuk and Albanese, who want the Greens' preferences in the elections, they go and build solar panels, install solar panels and wind turbines, destroy our electricity sector just to get votes. And some inner city people don't realize where their bloody food comes from. They're destroying farmland, which is destroying the future of their food. The land area for a coal-fired power station is tiny. The land area for a nuclear power station is tiny. The land area for a hydro is large when you consider the dam and the lake behind it, but it's tiny when you consider the turbines. Wind and solar, enormous areas of land just destroyed. As I mentioned, toxins in the water in Brisbane, potentially, if these large panels at large solar complexes, industrial complexes, go ahead at Kilcoy. How am I doing for time? Halfway through. Okay, I'll see if I can hurry it up. These solar panels complexes and wind turbine complexes are mostly foreign-owned, and I mean mostly. At least 70% foreign-owned, largely Chinese. The Koreans own, Arc Energy owns the Chalumban prospect that's under construction now. So we're subsidizing some large foreign multinationals to destroy our economy, and we're giving dependence of our economy to Chinese wind turbines and solar panels. The number one cost category for manufacturing these days is not labor. It used to be labor. It's not anymore, because manufacturing is so heavily automated and mechanized. And the number one cost category now, the highest cost category component in manufacturing, is now electricity. Electricity. And so when we destroy our electricity sector and raise prices artificially through stupid policies, dishonest, deceitful policies, we are shutting down manufacturing, and we're sending it to China, where they're building coal-fired power stations hand over fist, at least one a week, sometimes two a week, being commissioned. They produce 9 times the amount of coal we produce, and they want our coal, and they're importing our coal, and they send in return wind turbines, solar panels, which are destroying our electricity sector. This is insanity. Another problem is that we spent millennia scratching around in the dirt, our ancestors scratching around in the dirt as humans, dependent on nature, floods, famines, droughts, storms. Because of coal, and because of oil, and because of natural gas, and because of uranium, we became independent of nature for our energy source. We could have it on perpetually, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We are no longer dependent on nature. Now we're going back to being dependent on nature. And everyone knows, you just have to look outside your house for a few days. The weather is highly variable. Rain, storm, still. It just varies so much. And we're returning our society being dependent on nature. Absolutely nuts. Wind turbines and the power from wind turbines and solar panels is asynchronous. It's not stable. Coal, nuclear, hydro and gas are all stable, synchronous power. And that means they're highly stable. Wind and solar, as well as being unreliable, as well as being very expensive, are also unstable because they're asynchronous. And they're also not secure. So it costs extra, quite a bit extra, to make sure that we have that we can manage the asynchronous power, which people told us, the experts in electricity told us many years ago, decades ago, when we were starting this nonsense, that we will have to do extra costs, huge extra costs, for synchronizing the power. They're not reliable, as I said. They're not secure. They hurt the environment. We are going around killing power stations, perfectly good power stations, before solar and wind are even proven. And we know they're already saying there are problems. There are senior experts in our electricity sector saying that we will have even more problems in the future as we become higher a proportion of solar and wind. This is not about different energy, solar and wind instead of coal and oil. This is about limited energy. When you limit the energy, you can control who gets it and when they get it. And if you want more proof of that, Dan Andrews, people in the Labor government in Victoria, in New South Wales as well, and other places around the world, are now saying they want to ban gas. Why? Because you can't control gas remotely. If someone wants more gas for cooking or heating, they just turn up the gas. But with electricity, you can control it remotely. Each house can be controlled remotely. Each car can be controlled, if it's an electric car, remotely. So that's what they're after. And they've admitted it. They've admitted that they're after more control. You know, George Soros, he's a grubby, in my opinion, inhuman billionaire. Most people know what he's like. He captured the Democrat Party in America. He funds them. He's captured them. And he told Obama to come up with the rhetoric of banning coal. And Obama did his best. And the share price of one very large coal company fell 98%. Fell 98%. It got down to 2% of what it was worth. And so it went from $1,100 down to about $15 a share. Guess who bought the shares? Guess who bought the shares? George Soros. Soros bought those shares. Soros has a history of destroying economies, destroying nations' economies, and then going in and cleaning up. Food processing depends heavily on electricity, so we'll see an increase in food prices. There is not one redeeming feature of solar and wind. Oh, hang on, no, sorry, there is. If you're off the grid, well and truly off the grid, a long way from the nearest grid connection, solar makes sense. But then you've still got to have huge batteries. It's still very expensive, but at least you'd have electricity. But even then, a diesel generator is quite often far superior to solar panels. When you figure out the cost of the days when the sun's not shining, the days when you need to rely on your battery, the cost of the battery, the cost of the huge excessive, because of the low power density, the energy density of solar, you need a huge array of solar panels just to get the 10% that you can get out of them. Then solar doesn't even make sense there. I would rely on a generator, like diesel generator. So again, it's insane, and it's deceit that's driving this. There's no scientific basis, and it contradicts nature and empirical scientific data. And if I've gone through the science, I've held the CSIRO accountable. Let's talk about the CSIRO. No, we'll talk in a minute. In 2009, we had a global experiment. 2009 was the 12 months after the global financial crisis. We had a recession around the world, almost a depression. It was severe. We didn't suffer much in Australia because we kept exporting our coal and our iron ore and other products to China and other people using our minerals. So we didn't suffer that, but around the world they did suffer a severe recession. In a severe recession, the use of hydrocarbon fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas decreases because there's less demand for travel, there's less demand for industry, less demand for power. So we've been told, the line that we've been told by the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, by the Greens, by the Labor Party, and by the Liberal Party, is that the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere determines the temperature. It's complete crap. But let's just go with them for a minute. So the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is increasing. All right. So what they're saying is we are having warmth. Then they change that to say, no, we will get warmth. It's not even warm at the moment. We will get warmer. So that means that what they're saying is that our production of carbon dioxide from cows farting, cows belching, and from cars and farming and from electricity production, power stations, factories, etc., is producing carbon dioxide. It is. It's driving up the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. It's not, but I'll get to that in a minute. And that's going to warm the planet. Going to warm the planet. So what they're telling us is that we need to cut our production of carbon dioxide. When we cut our production of carbon dioxide, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere will turn around and go down. And we'll be cooler. We're not even warm yet compared to the past, but that's what they tell us. All right. So the first thing that would happen, and they're saying we must cut our use of hydrocarbon fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas to produce less carbon dioxide. Okay, let's go with that. So what would you expect to happen to the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in a severe recession when we cut our production, cut our use of hydrocarbon fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas? You'd expect the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to decrease. They're not. They're going up at the same rate as they have gone up for the last 50 years. We didn't measure it before then. So I asked the CSIRO about that in 2019, and they said there's been an inflection. It's complete crap. The graph slope has not changed. There's been no inflection. There's been no decrease. Not even the slightest bit of inflection. So I just let the CSIRO go. I came back and I printed graphs from the 11 recording stations, measuring stations for carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere around the world, including the CSIRO's Cape Grim installation just north of Tassie. In 2020, we had a major recession, almost another depression, due to COVID mismanagement. Not due to COVID, due to COVID mismanagement and deceit. Again, we had a major recession. The use of hydrocarbon fuels plummeted, coal, oil, and natural gas. That meant the production of carbon dioxide from human activity decreased dramatically. So you'd expect the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to stop increasing, and to tip over. It continued, unabated. Straight line, no inflection. What that tells you is that if we have a severe depression, severe recession, and we cut our fuel use, just as the government is telling us we need to, it has no impact on the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. None at all. That's because nature controls the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The oceans contain, by themselves, 50 to 70 times the carbon dioxide in dissolved form as in the entire atmosphere. Slight changes in water temperature lead to changes in atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide. Clearly, we cannot affect the levels, we are not affecting the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Clearly, it is useless for us to cut our carbon dioxide output, our use of hydrocarbon fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas, and to stop cows farting. So there's no point. But then if you look at it further and you actually look at the data, before we get onto the data from the CSIRO, John Howard's government was the worst, far worse than Rudd's government, for implementing UN and World Economic Forum climate and energy policies. In 2007, John Howard got the boot from Parliament after implementing the renewable energy target, after his government stole farmers' property rights to comply with the UN's Kyoto Protocol, the climate protocol. He was the first major party leader to put in place an emissions trading scheme as policy. He brought in the national electricity market, which is the national electricity racket. We used to have states, well, I won't go into the details, but states ran their market, ran their electricity sector, so we had a market for energy. Now we've got a bureaucratic controlled racket. That was John Howard's government. The Liberal Nationals did that. 6 years later, after he retired from politics, John Howard was the guest speaker at the Global Warming Policy Foundation. Now, the Global Warming Policy Foundation is a skeptic think tank that focuses mainly on the economics, because they're saying it's insane to do what we're doing. And they've got very good reasons. Former Chancellor of the Exchequer in Britain, Lord Nigel Lawson, formed the Global Warming Policy Foundation. And lo and behold, John Howard in 2013 was their guest lecturer for the Global Warming Policy Foundation's annual lecture. And he said, after introducing the worst regulations and legislation in this country, he said, on the topic of climate science, he is agnostic. He didn't have the science. There it is. From the man who did the most damage, whose government did the most damage, he admitted that he didn't have the science. All of this is based on bullshit, not science. We now have the CSIRO have admitted to me under my questioning in sessions with me dedicated to my questions, 2.5, 3 hours long. We've had 3 sessions with the CSIRO. The first one, they admitted that the CSIRO has never said that carbon dioxide from human activity is a danger and needs to be cut. Never said it. CSIRO's own words. CSIRO at the second session admitted that today's temperatures are not unprecedented. Yet the whole of this climate change scam, this climate fraud, was based on unusual, unprecedented warming. They're not unprecedented, which means it's happened in the past when we couldn't have caused it. Then they tried to say that the rate of temperature rise is unusual. Well, that's crap too, because the papers that they cited, we tore apart, left them in tatters. One of the papers, the lead author admitted that you can't rely upon the 20th century temperature stack that he relied on. One data point. That's what the CSIRO is going off, and it's crap. So the rate of temperature increase is not unprecedented. What's more, it's virtually zero. It's flat. Since 1995, the satellites have shown that temperatures have not risen at all since 1995. They've gone up with El Niños, down with La Niñas, up with El Niños, down with La Niñas. They've had variation. And according to which temperature data you interpret, there might be a slight increase, but it's almost flat, almost flat. The other one is flat. So there's no unusual rate of temperature rise at all. China pumps billions of tons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere every year. Carbon dioxide is plant food. It's nature's natural, trace, organic gas, essential for all life on this planet. So we've had billions of tons of gas, carbon dioxide, coming from China, India, Brazil, Russia, Europe, and America. We've had the temperature basically flat for the last 28 years. Let me introduce a few more figures. As I said, I was going to get this through because I made that promise. So Alex Epstein, the wonderful book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, The Moral Case for Hydrocarbons, he shows that for every megawatt of wind turbine power, it requires 542 tons of steel for each megawatt from a wind turbine. For coal-fired power requires 35 tons of steel. That means wind requires, per unit of electricity, requires 15.5 times what coal does. Now can you see why wind turbines are so damn expensive? They produce so little electricity and the costs are so damn high that the unit cost of electricity is extremely unaffordable. And just remember, both parties are doing it. The safeguard policy, which Bowen and Albanese turbocharged back in last September, the LNP introduced under Hunt as climate minister and environment minister, and Turnbull as prime minister in the back end of 2015, December 2015. And when it was introduced, it was foreshadowed as part of a global carbon dioxide tax. Insane. Deceit. You know, right in that same area, we did a little bit of exploring, and we learned from the locals that the tunnel under the Tully hydro scheme has almost been completed. They're using it as a bloody warehouse for the army. It's ready to go, a hydro power station, ready to go, and North Queenslanders want it. So we've got speaking of hydropower, that's not the same as pumped hydropower, which is Snowy 2. Snowy 2 has just had a change, a revision to its project. Snowy 2, pumped hydro, it's not hydro, pumped hydro is a disaster in the making. No business case, no cost-benefit analysis, just pumped together by Turnbull because he had people in the opposition pushing him at the time for getting wind and solar. So he said, oh no, I'll come up with pumped hydro instead. And he had to be seen to be doing something. Then we've got this dopey Palaszczuk government, Yungala, Barumba, Burdekin Falls, destroying beautiful environment, chasing pumped hydro. Pumped hydro only works if your peak prices are very, very high. And it's so inefficient. So inefficient. And so what it means is that if you've got a pumped hydro scheme, it means that you have destroyed your natural electricity market. You have destroyed it because it's become so out of kilter that it now peak times can afford to pump water back uphill to let it generate power going down. In our country, policy, legislation from the Labor Party and the Liberal Nationals is about looking good, not doing good. It's about looking good and being ignorant. Solar and wind is killing our country. And why are they doing it? Because they want the Greens' preferences. The Greens, thousands of kilometres away, tucked up in their cosy little houses in inner city Brisbane, inner city Sydney, inner city Canberra, inner city Melbourne, not realising they're destroying our country's food capacity. Ignorant, ideological Greens killing their food source, and dopey, gutless, ignorant, Liberal, Labor, National Party MPs killing our food source. The underlying belief of all of this is one of anti-humans. The fundamental fact, and I'm going to talk more about this in the future, all of these policies are based on the belief that humans are greedy, rapacious, uncaring, unkind, irresponsible, don't give a damn. The fact is, if you're sitting here watching me, and I'm speaking into this camera, the fact that I'm alive shows that someone cared enough, because when I was born, I was completely helpless, as were you, as was everyone watching this show. We only survived because someone cared. Now, not every parent is perfect, so don't get me wrong on that. But you're only here because someone cared. We are not greedy, rapacious, uncaring, irresponsible, unkind. The fundamental belief driving this bullshit, this economy-destroying, inhuman, anti-environment policies of wind and solar is anti-human at its base. The whole thing is based on a lie. We are here because someone cared. Now, I told you a few weeks ago that I promised to get that through. That's what I've done now. I normally, as I said, like to have half an hour or so at least of questions. So we've got 7 minutes or 5 minutes of questions. So I'll turn it open to questions. Oh, Philip, thank you. G'day, Malcolm. I was there in Brisbane last Saturday. It was a great event. Wasn't it ever? Wasn't Alan Jones fabulous? I think all the speakers were fabulous. For those who don't know, it was One Nation put on a conference for freedom of speech because we're so deeply concerned, as are many people around our country, at the Labor government's misinformation, disinformation bill. That's basically, it is a censorship bill. And by the way, the Liberals are now criticising it, but Liberal Minister Paul Fletcher, as Communications Minister, introduced it into the Parliament, a similar bill into the Parliament under Morrison. So, and we know that there was censorship going on between the Morrison government health department and Department of Home Affairs during the COVID mismanagement because they were deceitfully suppressing free speech. Yeah, it was a wonderful day. We had so many speakers, and they made it very, very clear. Alan Jones, Professor David Flint, Dr. David Adler, senior people in our communities, all currently from Sydney, came up for it. They came up and shared their wisdom. And the Brisbane Declaration has been published now on our website. Professor David Flint, constitutional lawyer, renowned for his defence of our country. A marvellous man, marvellous speaker, marvellous man. He came up with the Brisbane Declaration. It is now something we'll be pushing. So sign up to the newsletter, sign up to go and visit our website and look for the Brisbane Declaration and sign it, please. And while you're at it, sign our petition. We want to make it the biggest petition in the country against this censorship bill from the Labor Party. Tracy Lee, Skerritt and Murphy, your question. Skerritt and Murphy covered up corruption and medical tyranny. They should be jailed. If members of the public did this, we would be jailed. You are absolutely correct. I can feel my blood starting to boil. These people have covered up corruption. They have endorsed corruption in Big Pharma, in Pfizer. And they have endorsed medical tyranny. They have perhaps been the ones, in part, implementing medical tyranny. I think they should be jailed. I want to put them on trial. And you're right. If members of the public did this, we would be jailed. Spot on. Lindy, yes, why do the Greens want to destroy the land for these wind turbines? Dollars, perhaps, you say? Yep. Well, what they're after is political power. They want to control our electricity sector. They want to control our food production. They want to control our mobility. If you remove the car, and electric vehicles are not about an alternative form of car, they're about removing cars. They're inherently expensive. They're inherently resource hogs. They're not sustainable. And when they switch if it continues, when they switch our transport sector onto electricity, we won't have trucks. Be very inefficient transport. We'll be paying through the neck for our food and everything we currently use trucks for. But in addition, they will overload the electricity sector because remember, we've got a level of electricity that is decreasing because of solar and wind. We have got demand for electricity increasing because of electric vehicles and converting gas onto electricity. So you'll have a huge mismatch, which will huge mismatch between demand and supply, which will dramatically raise electricity prices. If this continues, this insanity, and the people keep putting up with this rubbish, you haven't seen anything yet in the form of electricity rises. When we convert our car fleet, what's left of it at the time, to electricity, will be paying through the neck for this. Correct, Lindy. Meg Thornton, Germany's pulling down windmills and going back to coal. Yes, you're right, Meg. That's been a story for a couple of months now. There's a coal mine in Germany that they're rapidly trying to expand, and to do so, they need to clear the wind turbines out of the way. They're knocking down wind turbines, great, to go back to coal so they can increase use of coal. Because coal has clean, high-density energy. It's concentrated energy. It's come from the sun, solar. So we're just recycling energy. Bill says, Greens are supporting cobalt child slave labor in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Correct, they are. That's exactly what's going on. Child labor is, we don't use the word slave at the moment, and you'll see why in a couple of weeks' time. You'll see why I don't use the word slave. But it is child labor. It's basically slave labor. We won't call it that for now, but it is child labor. And child labor is defined as any child of school age who has to work, who can't go to school because he or she has to work. You are absolutely right, Bill. The Greens are supporting this hideous child slave labor in the Democratic Republic of Congo and in other parts of Africa. These kids cannot get out of their poverty trap because they are forced to work, so they can't go to school, they can't ever escape the poverty. We're right at 59 minutes. I've caught up, so I'm going to say goodbye now. But thank you so much for your questions, and I've kept my promise now to go through what we saw in North Queensland, Ravenshoe. Stand up for the people who are fighting against solar panels, wind turbines, and transmission lines, destroying our country, anti-environment, anti-human, anti-economy, anti-security. Thank you so much for listening. See you next week. Have a good weekend.